Welcome to Inner Peace Better Health, where we explore the bridge between mind, body, and soul. Today's guest, Sean Blackwell, is a holotropic breathwork facilitator and author of Bipolar Awakenings, the quest to heal bipolar disorder. Through years of dedicated work, Sean has helped people move beyond the label of disorder to discover deep, lasting healing, often medication-free. Today, we'll uncover the spiritual dimension of mental health and what it truly means to awaken through struggle. Sean, it's so nice to have you on the show.
Thank you, Shadow. It's nice to be here.
Great. It's our pleasure. So, Sean, you have redefined how people view bipolar disorder. What's the first thing led you to see it as something more than just a medical condition, perhaps even a spiritual awakening?
Well, the first thing, and it caught me quite by surprise, was in 1996, I had my own, what I call a bipolar awakening. I thought I had died and I was being taken to heaven or nirvana, something like that. And the police had grabbed me because I was in a hotel ballroom. I had taken an intensive self-help course, which had sort of triggered this episode in me. And I was in a hotel ballroom, just stripped right down to my underwear. And I refused to put my clothes back on. And they put me in a stretcher and took me to the psychiatric hospital. But in that whole experience, which I've written about at length, we only have 30 minutes here. So I've written about it at length in my first book, which is available as a free PDF on my website, okay, bipolarawakenings.com. The name of the book is Am I Bipolar or Waking Up? And that's available as a free PDF. So I tell the whole story there. But for me, it was a very good thing. It made me feel like, oh, I finally kind of fit into the world a little bit better. I wasn't so separate. It ended 7 years of on again, off again depression. And when I went back to work, my career got a lot better, which is usually the opposite of what happens to people who end up in the psychiatric hospital. But my salary tripled over the next 3 years. I just felt more involved in life. People felt like I cared about their business, and I wasn't worried as much, So that was an experience that I came to understand through the work of a Czech psychiatrist named Dr. Stan Grof as a spiritual emergency, something that looks like schizophrenia or a bipolar psychosis, but actually could be very beneficial for you. And I always knew it was beneficial from the beginning. But a year after I had the episode, I found the work, and then I was like, oh, this is what happened to me. I didn't, in my head in 96, I didn't have a mental disorder. I had a spiritual breakthrough that just was a little bit too much. Okay. But then 10 years later, my life has changed completely. It's 2007. I'm living in Brazil. I used to live in Canada. I moved to Brazil. I have a Brazilian wife, and one of her nieces has an experience very similar to mine. And we supported her through it, and she recovered quite well. But the psychiatrist still insisted she take psychiatric medications and was suggesting bipolar disorder as what she had. And so from that point, it became, well, what's the difference between what happened to me, which was so beneficial, and what happened to her, which was leading to a lifetime of medications? And after about 4 months of intense study, I realized that this thing that I thought was the total opposite of what happened to me was actually hard to differentiate and was very close. So a 1 in 20,000 experience that I thought I had was maybe more like 1 in 20, because bipolar disorder affects about 5% of people, So it was just a huge, oh my God, kind of feeling. And then that became my mission in life, is to teach people about the spiritual dimension of bipolar disorder, because usually when people are in psychosis, they have spiritual experiences. But then if they are spiritual and less paranoid, there's great potential for healing as well.
True. I feel like that perspective is quite revolutionary because you're turning something feared as an illness to an invitation, specifically like an invitation for transformation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think my website, again, Bipolar Awakenings, that term I put together after about 10 years into the work, because I saw the paradox there that it can really cut either way. If you kind of externalize the process and give up on it, then you're going to need meds for life. But if you recognize that something's going on within you, you can use it for personal transformation. And that's why I've got a big eye on the cover of the book there, because most of the people who reach out to me and they say, well, what should I do? Should I get off my meds or not? And I say, no, stay on your meds, but start working on yourself, because this process can cut either way, or
Yes,
break
yes.
either way.
Yes, true, true. And this process of transformation brings me to something you've dedicated years to, the power of breath itself, right? You've guided many through holotropic breathwork. How does conscious breathing actually access the deeper layers of trauma and healing?
Right. Um, Holotropic breathwork. I'm a certified holotropic breathwork facilitator, and this was a program that was developed by Dr. Stan Grof. And the breathwork itself is a form of aggressive breathing that's done on a yoga mat with a trained facilitator and powerful music playing. Okay. But it's not a specific breathwork technique like a pranayama, for example, or the Kundalini fire breathing, where you breathe in through the nose and direct it towards your sixth chakra, something like this. No, it's just an aggressive breathing that happens on the yoga mat. And the breath itself will start to break down the ego functioning, which could sort of create separation between us and our world and our inner world. It just breaks the whole thing down. Like psychedelic therapy, when they do these psychedelics, then your ego breaks down and material comes up. In the same way, when you overbreathe, after about 20 minutes, the ego starts to break down and then material comes up. And in that process, you need to start to express it through physical movement and vocalization. And what comes up can be, very surprising. It can be trauma that comes up. It could be moments that are really beautiful from your life that come up. Can be birth experiences that come up. And you can even have identification, for example, with animal experiences. Like I think the first breathwork experience I ever had, I had this image of a tiger come to me. And I started to work that out on the mat. And then the funniest part, though, was that after having this experience, I was in a restaurant with the two women that I'd gone to the course with. And I started to tell them about having this experience of the tiger. And they were both kind of ignoring me. They were kind of like looking at the menu, wondering what to do. And then I roared and I scared the two of them to death. It was like I was a tiger in the room. They both jumped out of their seats, So this work, it gets into very primal parts of us. And then just one caveat that a holotropic breathwork is a very formatted process, 3 hours, generally in a group setting. And so that's been contraindicated for people with bipolar disorder. What I did was modify the technique and put it into a retreat format so that I was with people for 10 straight days. So they got unlimited access to me, personal attention, and if anything serious came up, I could stay with them. So, for example, in a few situations, I've had to stay with people. If we started breathwork at 8 p.m., I was with them until 3 o'clock in the morning until they were ready to go to sleep and that kind of thing. And you can't get that in a typical therapeutic setting.
True, true. And I feel it's so incredible that as something as natural as breath helps you unlock something that is suppressed for years, right?
Yeah, and that's what's so confusing to people about it is they think, well, it must be a specific way of breathing, a specific format, but it's really not. And the mysterious part is that the actual healing action isn't necessarily the breath. It's this healing field, divine intelligence, you could call it God, whatever your religion is, it would be that higher power, And the reason we know this is because if you, and I've noticed this on my retreats, that if you do the breath work every day, when does the healing stop? Well, it stops after about 10 days. And the reason I know this is because I've gone and seen people on their 10th day of doing a breath work, and they're huffing and puffing and breathing so hard, and nothing is happening. Because the healing field has said, no, you're done for now, And I've had that experience myself. I was in a paid breathwork session once, and after about 30 minutes, the whole thing stopped. And I tried to get it going again, and it just wouldn't work. It's like if the divine intelligence doesn't think you should continue, that you're done, then you're done. So it's really not the energy of the breathing. It's the divine intelligence knowing that you're in a safe setting, that you've got a good facilitator with you, and that you're ready for whatever material is going to come. And it will bring you the material that you're ready for, not necessarily the most difficult material.
That's very interesting, I feel like. And your approach doesn't stop at inner work. It also challenges some deeply held beliefs in the world of psychiatry. So let's talk about that too. The idea of healing bipolar without medication challenges tradition is sorry, let me do that
Sure, go
again.
ahead.
I'm really sorry. Yeah.
Mhm.
The idea of healing bipolar without medication challenges traditional psychiatry. How do you navigate skepticism while honoring both science and spirituality?
How do I deal with the skepticism? Well, first, I take what I would consider to be an integral approach to my work. I recognize that people need to function in society and they need to be dependable. So, psychiatry, I believe, will always play a role in our society. And when people come on retreats for me, for example, or when they work with me at a distance, I insist that they remain on their medications until we see significant shifts. Okay.
Mm.
And then if there's reductions to take place in meds withdrawal, I ask them to talk to their psychiatrist about it, you know,
Mm.
and work with theirs. So I see a role for psychiatry, psychology, and the theory of transpersonal psychology. The work of Stan Grof is what my work is based on. The peer support movement, which brings an emotional connection, so that if people, you might not have it in India, I'm not sure, but when people have somebody with them who's been through it before, you know,
Mm.
not in a hierarchical way like a therapist patient, but more of friend to friend, you know.
Mm.
And so even in my work, the first thing I tell people is about my own hospitalization, so that we have that peer established way of dealing with things. You could say, if you look at, for example, basketball teams, the professional basketball players appreciate coaches who've played professional basketball themselves. If they've never played the game before, they feel like the coach doesn't really understand. And I think to a certain degree, that's the same thing with the people I work with, is they know I've been in the hospital, right? And then the last part, so psychiatry, psychology, the peer support movement, and shamanism, okay? Well, a shamanic approach, which is the spirituality, and that's what I've talked about with breath work. Now, there's a second part to your question, though, which is that I am directly challenging psychiatry when they talk about the chemical imbalance and the genetics to the whole thing. Because from the scientific perspective, there is no scientific proof that these disorders are genetic or are based on chemical imbalances of any kind. Based on the work of Boston Globe journalist Robert Whitaker, who wrote Mad in America and Anatomy of an Epidemic, based on those books, what he found is that the research shows that people with disorders have the same range of serotonin and dopamine as anyone else, and that no specific genetic has been attributed to any disorder at this point, that the relationship to trauma is much stronger statistically than any genetic relationship. So I think psychiatry needs to be a little bit more honest with itself and start from that basis. And it's starting to happen. It's starting to happen.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, and I feel like it is very important to find the balance between healing the brain and healing the soul. And it is very important that we give equal importance to both healing the brain and healing the soul, right?
Sure. And I think in the bigger picture, it's really hard to differentiate the brain and the soul and the mind, because where these traumas are held are not in the brain, it's in the body.
Mm.
And often it's along the chakra line. So one of the deepest healings I ever had was for my first client, Livia. And in her case, she had a pain in her tailbone, in her coccyx, that was so bad. She had been to 6 doctors and none of them could solve the problem. None of them could medicate it. And some recommended surgery. And then in her fifth breathwork session with me, she felt hot energy come up the spine, into the shoulders, and out through her hands. And this coccyx pain of hers disappeared. It permanently disappeared. So right there, we saw a relationship between the coccyx and her bipolar, and we suspected as such when we started the work together. We had a suspicion.
Right, right. And let's also talk about the healing experience in communities that you do. Your retreats have changed many lives. What happens within that safe space that allows such deep transformations?
It's the fact that it is a safe space, and that
Mhm.
the soul and it's almost like we've got the mind, the thought patterns of our brain, which are sort of ego driven and tell us what's good. But then there's a deeper knowing that comes from our soul. And so the soul knows when it's safe. And when the soul is safe, it can start to sort of automatically unheal or start healing outside of our control.
Mm.
And so it just spontaneously erupts. And Stan Grof, Dr. Stan Grof, referred to it as the inner healer. Then when we do breath work, we're working out the inner healer. But in my work, I've seen it even goes one step further, which is it's a healing field, actually. And this healing field can actually transfer unconscious energetic trauma from my client, for example, to me or another empathetic supporter in the room. And then we can do the breath work on their behalf. It sounds pretty trippy, but it's become a regular part of my process for me to be working on behalf of my client in what very much looks like what you would call a shamanic process.
It's very interesting, and I feel like the most important part there is having a safe space, having a safe space to heal,
It
right?
is. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So moving on, for those listening who's been told their diagnosis defines them, what message would you want to offer them?
That there are options, that there are other ways of looking at things, and that human beings are evolving. Our understanding of ourselves are evolving. And if you start to accept the subjective truth of what you're going through when you're in psychosis, for example, so-called psychosis, often there is deep meaning there, So until now, whenever people have talked about their spiritual experiences, like feeling that they've become Jesus or they're here to save the world, that they've died and they're being reborn, these kind of experiences have been just written off as crazy by psychiatry. But once you get into the depths of why people are feeling this way, you really get a picture of their soul, So when somebody says to me about a family member, they say, "Oh, they haven't been themselves. They're in bipolar mania right now. They're not themselves." I'm like, actually, right now they are themselves, because when people are in mania, that's when you get the truth. People in mania don't lie. They just tell you the straight truth.
Right.
And that's where you see the raw soul. It's just in a lot of pain and it's been repressed. So it's in daily life when we kind of hide ourselves, but in mania, all the truth comes out. And if people had a closer look at that and started to see it with a little bit more compassion, that would be a really great start. Yeah.
True, true. And I was wondering, for people who find it a bit difficult to see illness, as so-called illness, as a transformative opportunity, for them, how can they begin to see their symptoms as signals of awakening rather than permanent flaws?
I think watching my videos has been very validating for a lot of people. It started out as my YouTube channel. The YouTube channel used to be called Am I Bipolar or Waking Up? But then we switched it to Bipolar Awakenings. And I have a lot of videos there that talk about the spiritual dimension and healing potential of bipolar. It's a YouTube channel that over the years has gathered 25,000 subscribers, 26 at this point, I think. And so many people just said to me that what they appreciated so much wasn't that I was there to help them heal their condition, but that I was validating their life experience. So,
Mm.
because And my thinking was, this is back in 2007. I'm going to put up one video after another that is going to show people that I understand their experience in a non-ordinary state. Okay. One after another. And when they see their experience in my videos, they're going to know they're not crazy. See, they're going to know that they're going to know that they don't have a broken brain. And that's the hardest part, is when people say they can't trust their own mind. There's basically 13 specific spiritual delusions that the vast majority of people will have 4 to 6 of those 13 delusions, and then it will be mixed in with a fear aspect of paranoia, which is not helpful. And so if people are extremely paranoid, it's very difficult to help them, and they may need medications for life, for sure. But if it is a strongly spiritual experience, this is a person who is having more positive experience in psychosis, and they are generally much easier to work with because there's less fear there, and there's less very difficult trauma like sexual abuse and physical abuse and that sort of thing.
True, true. And I feel like that idea of you're not broken, you're just waking up, might be the hope that someone needed to hear today. So thank you for that, Sean. And
I hope so.
yes, yes. So before we wrap our episode, for our listeners who would love to connect with you, can you tell them the ways to do so?
Sure. The best way, I think, is through my website at bipolarawakenings.com. Okay. That will give you access to all my information. I've got some podcasts on Spotify as well, the YouTube channel, my books that are both free PDFs. I offer free 30-minute consultations for people as well. So everything is pretty much there.
Great, great. So the website link, YouTube, podcast link, everything, the ways to connect with Sean will be in show notes. So I request all our listeners to go and check that too. Well, Sean, it was a wonderful experience with you on the show.
Thank you, Shadow. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. What a profound and illuminating conversation with Sean Blackwell. His work reminds us that mental health and spiritual growth are not separate paths. They are one journey towards wholeness. So if you're struggling, breathe a little deeper, listen inward, and remember, healing begins when you believe awakening is possible. Until next time, stay gentle with your mind and at peace with your soul. Thank you for tuning in. This has been your host, Charu, and you've been listening to Inner Peace, Better Health, where peace is power and overthinking's overrated.